I was walking down the street this morning just watching people pass by, people rushing to work, drinking coffee, jogging. And it struck me how easy it is to see the human body as this singular solid thing.
hmm
We see a person. We experience life at the macro level. We hear a heart beating, we see a chest rising and falling, we feel a stomach growl. It feels like one big coherent machine.
It is the natural human perspective. We
Yeah.
live our lives at the macro scale. We feel the output, not the machinery.
Right.
We feel the health or the sickness, not the millions of tiny adjustments happening every single second just to keep us upright.
Exactly. But that's actually a deception, isn't it? Because looking at the research we have in front of us today, that macro view, it really hides the real story.
It does.
There is a central tension that we need to address right at the top of this deep dive. Before an organ speaks, before your heart skips a beat or your muscles cramp, a cell has already made a decision.
That is the absolute truth. Before a disease appears as a symptom you can feel, a balance is shifted at a microscopic level. The organ failure is just the final act of a play that was written by the cells months or, even years prior.
And that is where we are going today. We are stepping into the engine room.
I like that analogy.
We're stripping away the paint job, which is sorry, anatomists, we love you. But today we're looking deeper, and we are looking at the wiring, the fuel lines, and the thermostat.
The physiology.
This is the first entry in what we're calling the Medlock Holmes Physiology series.
I like that title. We are doing detective work on our own biology. We're looking for the clues, the first principles that explain how life sustains itself against the chaos of the universe.
We are. And to do that, we have synthesized two absolute Bibles of medical education. If you went to medical school, or even if you just have a deep interest in biology, these names carry a lot of weight.
They certainly do.
We have Genong's Review of Medical Physiology, and we have the Guyton and Hall Textbook of Medical Physiology.
Two very different books, actually, but they complement each other beautifully.
Right, and I want to characterize them for you listening because it frames how we're going to talk about this. I like to think of Genong as the mechanic. It is obsessed with the cellular nuts and bolts, the chemical equations, the gritty details of neural integration. It's the how.
Whereas Guyton is the architect. Guyton is focused on the grand design, the control systems, and the why behind the structure. He wants you to understand the philosophy of the body, not just the parts list.
He loves a good feedback loop diagram.
He absolutely does. He thinks in systems.
So our mission today is to create a conceptual map. A quick disclaimer for everyone listening. This deep dive is a scaffold. It is an interpretation.
Right.
We want you to read the texts. We want to make that reading deeper and more confident, but we're going to help you see the forest and the trees.
We're building the mental hangers that you can hang the detailed facts on later.
Exactly. And I want to start with the concept that Guyton introduces early on, which, frankly, it just changed how I view my own existence. He describes the body not just as a machine, but as a social order.
A social order of about 35 to 40 trillion cells.
Let's just pause on that number, 40
Oof.
trillion.
Yeah.
It's a number so big it creates a paradox. We usually think of us as one individual, but biologically, we are a massive walking colony.
Precisely. And the paradox is this. Every single one of those 40 trillion cells is a living, breathing individual structure.
An individual.
Yes. If you take a cell out of your liver or your skin and place it in a dish with the right fluids and the right nutrients, it doesn't die.
It just keeps going.
It survives, it metabolizes, it divides. It can live for months, even years on its own. It is, for all intents and purposes, independent.
So in a way, we are just a vessel for 40 trillion tiny lives, yet inside us, they surrender that independence. They organize, they specialize.
They serve the collective. This transition from unicellular selfishness to multicellular cooperation is the fundamental story of physiology.
But there has to be a catch.
There is a catch, and this is crucial. For a cell to give up its independence, it demands a guarantee. It demands a safe environment.
It needs to trust that the world outside its walls won't kill it. If I'm a liver cell, I'm not going out hunting for food. I'm just sitting there doing my job, trusting that the food will come to me.
Exactly. And that trust relies entirely on one thing: maintaining the internal C.
Let's unpack that, because the internal C sounds very poetic, almost literary, but in Genong and Guyton, it's a very, very literal description of where our cells live.
It is. This brings us to the concept of the milieu intérieur. It's a French term coined by Claude Bernard, who was a giant of 19th century science.
Okay.
It simply means the internal environment. You see, our cells don't touch the outside world. They don't touch the air. They essentially float in fluid.
They're aquatic.
They are. And to understand the body, you have to stop looking at the solid parts and start doing the math of the fluid compartments. We call this the 60-40-20 rule.
I love a good rule of thumb, but let's break the math down so we can visualize it. We're using the average young adult male benchmark that Ganong uses. Sorry to anyone who doesn't fit that description, but physiology loves a standard model to start with.
It does. It just makes the math consistent. So take that standard human. Approximately 60% of their total body weight is water.
60%.
So if you weigh 70 kilograms, about 42 kilograms of you is just water.
We are mostly liquid. But that water isn't just sloshing around in a single tank like a waterbed. That would be chaotic.
No, it is strictly, and I mean strictly, compartmentalized. And this is where the social order comes in.
Okay.
Of that 60% total water, the vast majority, about 40% of your total body weight, is intracellular fluid, or ICF.
Intra meaning inside.
Inside. That is the water inside the 40 trillion cells.
That's the private reserve. That's the water inside the kitchen of each individual house.
Exactly. That leaves 20%. This is the extracellular fluid, or ECF. This is the internal C. It's the fluid that surrounds the cells, bathes them, and brings them food. It acts as the buffer between the cell and the harsh outside world.
And we can break that 20% down even further, right? Because not all extracellular fluid is the same. I mean, the water in my blood isn't exactly the same as the water sitting between my muscle fibers.
Correct. The ECF is split into two main subcompartments. About 15% of your body weight is interstitial fluid.
Interstitial.
Meaning in the spaces between. That's the fluid sitting in the microscopic spaces between cells. Think of it as the gel-like substance that fills the city streets of the social order.
And the remaining 5%.
That is the plasma, the fluid inside your blood vessels, the highway system.
So if you really step back and look at this architect view from Guyton, we are essentially walking bags of salt water, just structured by membranes to keep the salt in the right place.
That is a crude but surprisingly accurate summary. We are bags of compartmentalized seawater. But the fragility of this system is what makes it so fascinating from a medical standpoint.
Right.
You have these barriers separating the compartments. The blood vessel wall separates the plasma from the interstitial fluid. The cell membrane separates the interstitial fluid from the cell. If those barriers fail, you see immediate clinical consequences.
Ganong brings up edema here. I think most people know edema as swelling, like you get swollen ankles after a long flight. But mechanically, what is happening in the engine room?
Edema is a plumbing failure in the internal C. It is the accumulation of excess fluid in the interstitial spaces.
So the fluid is in the wrong compartment?
Good.
It's left the highway and is flooding the city streets.
Exactly. Usually fluid leaks out of the capillaries, which is the plasma compartment, to feed the cells in the interstitial compartment. It's then supposed to be scrubbed away by the lymphatic system, the body's drainage pipes.
Okay.
If the leak is too fast, or if that drain is clogged, that 15% compartment, the interstitial fluid, it starts to expand.
It violates the 60-40-20 separation.
And you can see it physically. If you press your thumb into a patient's swollen ankle and take it away, the pit remains. We call that pitting edema.
I've seen that.
That happens because you have physically displaced that excess interstitial water. You've pushed the C aside for a moment, and it takes time to flow back.
That is a vivid image. But it's not just about where the fluid is it? It's about what is in the fluid. This is where the chemistry gets really interesting to me. Both texts highlight that the recipe for the fluid inside the cell is totally different from the fluid outside.
This is the chemical gradient, and frankly, it is the basis of bioelectricity. It's the foundation of everything the nervous system does.
So let's look at the recipes. Outside the cell, in the ECF.
The extracellular fluid, the internal C, resembles the primordial oceans where life began. It is high in sodium, that's Na+, high in chloride, K-, and high in bicarbonate.
It's salt water. We literally carry the ocean from millions of years ago inside us.
We do. Now, look inside the cell. The intracellular fluid is completely different. It's a low in sodium, but incredibly high in potassium, K+, and also high in magnesium and phosphates.
So outside is salt, inside is potassium, like bananas. Why does this matter? Why not just have everything mixed together? I mean, it would be energetically cheaper, wouldn't it? We wouldn't have to fight to keep them separate.
It would be much cheaper, but it would be dead. A uniform solution is a dead solution. There's no potential.
Okay.
By separating these ions, by keeping sodium high outside and potassium high inside the cell, creates a battery. It creates potential energy.
I see. It's like a bow and arrow. The separation, the gradient, is the pulling back of the string.
Precisely. This is stored information waiting to be used. If you want to send a nerve signal, you just open a door and let the sodium rush in. You release the strain.
And the arrow flies.
Right.
Yeah.
But if the barrier breaks and the ions equilibrate, if the concentrations become equal inside and out, the cell loses its charge. It creates no energy. It dies.
That sets the stage perfectly. We have this fragile bag of fluids. We have these chemical gradients that need to be maintained against all odds. This leads us to the central philosophy of physiology, homeostasis.
A term coined by Walter Cannon in 1929, though, as we mentioned, the concept dates back to Claude Bernard. Bernard said, "The condition of a free life is the constancy of the internal environment."
The condition of a free life? That's profound. It means I can walk around in a dry desert or a freezing tundra only because my internal environment hasn't changed.
Correct. Your cells are never in the desert. Your cells are always in the tropical ocean of the ECF. You take the ocean with you. If you lose that internal constancy, you lose your freedom to live in the world.
Now, I think a lot of people hear homeostasis and they think static, like the body finds a setting and just stays there, frozen like a statue.
That is a dangerous myth. Homeostasis is not a static state. It is a dynamic range. It is a constant active oscillation around a set point.
Like driving a car.
Exactly like driving a car in a lane. You are never perfectly in the center for more than a second. You drift left, you correct right. You drift right, you correct left. To a passenger, it feels smooth. To the driver, the brain, it is constant, tiny adjustments.
And if you look at Gayton's data, specifically in one of his first tables, you realize just how narrow that lane is. We are walking a razor's edge.
Let's look at pH. It's the classic example. The normal range for arterial blood pH is 7.35 to 7.45.
That is a tiny window. That's a variance of just 1/10 of a pH unit.
It's minuscule. If you drop below 6.9 or go above 8.0 for more than a few minutes, you are likely dead.
Why? What's happening?
The enzymes that run your body, the little protein machines that do all the work, they have a very specific three-dimensional shape that depends on pH. If the pH changes, they warp, they denature, they stop working. The factory shuts down.
Or temperature. We all know 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 Fahrenheit is normal.
An increase of just 7 degrees Celsius, which is about 11 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, it creates a vicious cycle.
A vicious cycle.
The heat actually increases the rate of cellular metabolism.
Wait, so the hotter it gets, the faster the engine runs?
Yes, and a faster engine generates more heat, which makes it run faster, which generates more heat. It's a runaway process that destroys the cells. You literally cook yourself from the inside out.
That sounds terrifying. What about potassium? We said it's high inside the cell, low outside.
This is perhaps the most critical value in the ECF. If extracellular potassium drops to less than 1/3 of normal, your nerves can't fire properly. You get paralysis.
And if it goes the other way, if it gets too high?
If it doubles, the heart muscle becomes so excitable it can't relax. It goes into a state of paralysis in contraction. It stops beating.
So it's lethal.
This is why potassium injection is used in lethal injections. It crashes the electrical system of the heart immediately.
So the margin for error is effectively zero. How does the body manage this? We can't just hope for the best. This brings us to the control systems.
The primary mechanism is negative feedback.
Okay, let's unpack the loop. Because negative sounds bad. Nobody wants negative feedback at work. But in physiology, negative is the hero.
Negative simply means opposite to the stimulus. The loop has a few fundamental parts. A sensor detects a change. It compares that to a reference set point. If there's a difference, it generates an error signal, and an effector then acts to correct it.
The thermostat analogy is the easiest here. Room gets hot. That's the stimulus. Thermostat senses it, turns on the AC. That's the effector. Room cools down. The cooling is negative to the heating.
Correct. But let's use a physiological example to see the elegance. Take CO2. You exercise, your cells burn energy, and they produce high levels of CO2. That is the stimulus.
So the blood is becoming acidic and full of waste gas.
Right. The respiratory center in the brain, the sensor, detects this rise. It gets excited. It sends a signal to the lungs, the effector, to breathe more rapidly and deeply.
And you blow off the CO2.
You blow off the CO2. The level drops back to normal. The stimulus, high CO2, causes a reaction, lowering CO2. That's negative feedback.
And the baroreceptors for blood pressure work the same way.
Yes. High pressure physically stretches the arteries. The baroreceptors scream at the brain. The brain tells the heart to slow down and the vessels to dilate. Pressure drops.
Now, Guyton introduces a really cool engineering concept here called gain. This determines how good the system actually is at fixing the problem. I found this part fascinating because it puts a number on the body's competence.
Yes, the gain of a control system. It's a measure of its effectiveness. The formula is simply gain equals correction divided by error.
Walk us through that thought experiment from the text. I think it helps to hear the math.
Okay, imagine a person whose baroreceptor system is broken. It's offline. You infuse a bunch of blood into them. Because they can't compensate, their arterial pressure shoots up from a normal of 100 to 175 millimeters of mercury.
Okay, a 75-point jump. That's the baseline failure, the uncontrolled change.
That's the potential disaster. Now, take a normal person with a working system. You infuse the same amount of blood. The pressure starts to go up, but the system fights it. It only goes up to 125.
Okay, so the system prevented it from going all the way to 175. It stopped it at 125.
Exactly. So, what was the correction?
Well, it would have gone up by 75 points. It only went up by 25 points.
Right.
So the system corrected the pressure by 50 points, a correction of minus 50.
And the error?
The error is what's left over. It's the plus 25 millimeter Hg that the system couldn't fix. It's not a perfect system.
So, correction, which is minus 50, divided by the error, which is plus 25, that gives a gain of minus 2.
Correct. A gain of minus 2 it's decent. It means the system is capable of absorbing 2/3 of the shock. But compare that to the body's temperature control system.
Okay.
The gain for temperature regulation is roughly negative 33.
Negative 33, that's massive. It's an order of magnitude different.
It is exponentially more effective. It means the temperature control system is incredibly more precise and powerful than the blood pressure system.
Why the difference? Why is the body so much better at temperature than pressure? It comes back to what we discussed earlier. Trade-offs and lethality. You can survive high blood pressure for a while. It damages you over years, but you don't drop dead instantly.
Right.
But if your temperature goes up 7 degrees, you cuck. The body invests more engineering resources, a higher gain, into the systems that are most immediately lethal if they fail.
That's a great insight. It's not about having infinite capacity. It's about having regulation where it matters most. So that's negative feedback. The system fights the change. But then we have the danger zone, positive feedback.
The vicious cycle. In positive feedback, the initiating stimulus causes more of the same.
It's an amplifier.
It's an amplifier, and usually that's very bad. The classic death scenario Guyton describes involves bleeding.
This is the 1 liter versus 2 liters scenario.
Right. The average person has about 5 liters of blood. If you bleed 1 liter, your negative feedback systems, the baroreceptors, the hormonal responses, vasoconstriction, they can all compensate. You feel terrible, but you survive.
Okay.
But if you bleed 2 liters, you cross a critical threshold.
What happens at 2 liters? Why is that the tipping point?
Because at 2 liters of loss, the arterial pressure drops so low that the blood flow to the heart muscle itself through the coronary arteries drops below a critical level.
So the pump itself starts to starve for oxygen and fuel.
Exactly. The heart needs blood to pump blood. If it doesn't get enough, it weakens. Because it weakens, it pumps even less blood, which makes the pressure drop further, which makes the heart even weaker.
The drop causes a bigger drop.
That is positive feedback. It spirals downwards until death.
That's terrifying. It's like a microphone feedback loop, that awful screeching noise that just gets louder and louder until the speaker blows.
Precisely. It's an uncontrolled amplification.
But not all positive feedback is bad, right? There are exceptions where the body actually wants an explosion of activity.
There are rare, highly controlled exceptions. Clotting is one. A vessel ruptures, clotting factors activate enzymes, which activate more enzymes in the local area. It's a waterfall effect to plug the hole quickly.
You want that to be fast and aggressive. You don't want a gentle clot.
You absolutely do not.
Right.
Or childbirth.
Right.
The stretch of the cervix signals the uterus to contract. The contraction pushes the baby's head down, stretching the cervix more, which causes a stronger contraction. It builds and builds to a climax to expel the baby.
And nerve signals, we mentioned sodium rushing in. That initial rush opens more doors for sodium to rush in.
Exactly. But here is the nuance you must remember. Useful positive feedback must always be contained within a larger negative feedback loop.
What do you mean?
The clot creates a cascade, yes, but the process stops once the hole is plugged and other anti-clotting factors kick in. If it didn't,
your entire blood supply would turn into a solid block of jelly.
Exactly. The childbirth contractions stop once the baby is delivered and the stretching stimulus is gone. A runaway positive feedback loop is incompatible with life.
Before we leave control systems, Guyton mentioned some advanced controls that go beyond just reacting. Because reaction is slow, isn't it? If I trip, I can't wait for my brain to process the error signal and send a correction. I'd be on the floor.
Right. Reaction time is often too slow for complex movement. This is where the brain shows off. It uses feed-forward control and adaptive control.
So it anticipates.
It anticipates. When you decide to run, your brain sends the signal for the muscle contraction it thinks is required before the action even happens. It doesn't wait for the sensor to report back. It predicts based on experience.
But what if it's wrong? What if the ground is slippery this time?
Then, afterwards, it uses adaptive control. It gets feedback from your balance sensors. Did we wobble? If the answer is yes, it updates the math for the next step.
So it's learning.
It is delayed negative feedback. It's the brain correcting its own predictive model. It's learning. It's what allows a tennis player to return a serve.
It is physiology anticipating the future to maintain balance. That is incredible.
It is. It's what allows for high-performance movement.
All right, let's zoom in. We've talked about the fluids, the internal sea. We've talked about the control systems, the thermostat. Now we need to look at the barrier itself, the guardian, the cell membrane.
The lipid bilayer. This is the structure that defines inside versus outside. Without this, there is no life. It's a castle wall.
And chemically, it's fascinating. It's not just a plastic bag.
No, it is a fluid mosaic. It's in constant motion. It is about 55% protein, 25% phospholipid, and 13% cholesterol, which helps with fluidity.
And the phospholipids are the key to the barrier.
They are. They are these strange little molecules with a hydrophilic or water-loving head and a hydrophobic, water-fearing tail.
So when you put them in water, they just naturally organize.
They align tail to tail, hiding their fatty tails from the water on both sides. This creates a hydrophobic core, a layer of fat in the middle of the wall.
And that's crucial.
This is the key. It means water-soluble substances. Ions like sodium and potassium, glucose, urea, they cannot just pass through. They bounce off. They are blocked by that fatty core.
They need an invitation. They need a door.
They need a door. But fat-soluble stuff, oxygen, CO2, alcohol, they dissolve right into the fat and walk right through the wall like a ghost.
That's why alcohol hits you so fast.
It doesn't need a gatekeeper. It ignores the wall and diffuses straight into the cell.
Speaking of gatekeepers, that's where the proteins come in. The membrane is studded with them.
Integral proteins, these are the channels, the carriers, the pumps embedded in the membrane. They are the bouncers. They decide what gets in and what gets out. And then on the outside, we also have the glycocalyx, the sugar coating.
A sugar coating, like a donut.
Sort of. It's a fuzzy layer of carbohydrates attached to the outside proteins and lipids. It gives the cell an overall negative charge. It helps cells stick together to form tissues, and it acts as a receptor tag. It's how your immune system knows this cell belongs to me versus this is a bacteria.
Now, moving things across this barrier brings us to the physics of diffusion and osmosis. I feel like these terms get swapped a lot in casual conversation, but in physiology, the difference is everything.
Diffusion is simply random molecular motion. Heat is motion. Molecules are constantly bouncing around. If you have a high concentration of something in one area, purely by chance, they will bounce toward the area of low concentration until they are evenly spread out, down the gradient.
Ganong cites Fick's law here, which sounds very formal.
Fick's law. It sounds dry, but it explains how your lungs work. It states that the rate of diffusion is proportional to the surface area and the concentration gradient, and it's inversely proportional to the thickness of the membrane.
Okay, so if I want to move gas fast, like getting oxygen into the blood, I need a massive surface area, a steep gradient, and a paper-thin wall.
Exactly. And that is precisely how the lungs are built. The alveoli are incredibly thin and have the combined surface area of a tennis court. Physiology follows physics.
Osmosis, on the other hand, is the movement of the solvent, usually water, rather than the solute.
This happens when the particles, the solutes, can't move across the membrane. If you have a membrane that water can pass through but salt cannot, and you have salty water on one side and fresh water on the other, the salt wants to move to the fresh water, but it hits the wall.
So the water moves instead.
The water moves toward the salt to try to dilute it. Water chases the salt. Always. That's the fundamental rule of osmosis.
This leads to the concept of tonicity, which is huge clinically, giving 5E fluids.
Huge. We categorize fluids as isotonic, hypertonic, or hypotonic relative to the cell.
Okay.
Isotonic means the solution has the same osmotic pressure as the cell. The classic example is 0.9% saline. You put a red blood cell in it, nothing happens, it's happy.
Hypertonic.
The solution is saltier than the cell. Water rushes out of the cell to dilute the solution. The cell shrivels up like a raisin. We call that crenation.
Hypotonic.
The solution is more watery than the cell. Water rushes into the salty cell to try and dilute the inside. The cell swells and can burst, or it leans.
There's a great thought experiment in Ganong about 5% glucose, or dextrose. This trips up medical students all the time.
Ah, yes, the dextrose trap. You have a bag of 5% glucose. Chemically, it is isotonic. It has the same number of particles as plasma. So you think, okay, this is safe to give.
Seems logical.
But what happens when it enters the body?
The body uses the glucose, it eats it.
It metabolizes it instantly. The cells suck it up for energy.
So the particles, the glucose molecules, they disappear.
Essentially, yes, you are left with just the water. So what started as an isotonic fluid becomes, in effect, a hypotonic fluid. The water rushes into the cells. If you give this to a patient with a brain injury who already has brain swelling, you can swell their brain cells further and kill them.
That is a sobering realization. You have to think 4 steps ahead. It brings us back to the idea that these gradients are not just numbers, they are physical forces.
And electrical forces. Which brings us to our next big topic, battery.
Membrane potentials. This is often where students hit a wall, but let's simplify it. We establish that the inside of the cell is different from the outside.
High sodium outside, high potassium inside. And don't forget the proteins inside the cell. Proteins are large and generally carry a negative charge, and they are too big to escape. They are trapped inside.
This creates the Donan effect.
The Donan effect essentially says that because those large negative proteins are stuck inside, they influence how the other, smaller ions distribute themselves. They pull positive ions in and repel negative ions. They create a baseline negativity just by being there.
To quantify this fight between the chemical pull of diffusion and the electrical pull of charge, we use the Nernst equation.
The Nernst equation calculates the equilibrium potential. It asks a simple but profound question. For a specific ion, at what voltage would the electrical push exactly cancel out the chemical pull from diffusion?
It calculates the contentment voltage, the voltage where the ion is happy and stops moving.
I like that. Contentment voltage. Let's look at the numbers Ganong gives us, because they tell a story of desire.
A story of desire. Okay, let's start with chloride, Kl minus.
Its equilibrium potential is max 70 millivolts. That happens to be exactly what the resting membrane potential of a typical neuron is.
So chloride is happy.
Chloride is content. It is at equilibrium. It moves passively in and out. It doesn't really want to go anywhere. Now look at potassium, K+. Its equilibrium is negative 90 millivolts. The cell is resting at negative 70.
That's close.
It's close, but not perfect. Potassium is leaking out slightly, always trying to drag the voltage down to its contentment voltage of negative 90. But then there's sodium.
The outlier.
Sodium equilibrium potential is plus 60 millivolts.
Plus 60. But the cell is sitting at minus 70.
Exactly. Sodium is incredibly far from where it wants to be. Chemically, it wants to rush in because there's so little of it inside. And electrically, it wants to rush in because the inside of the cell is negative and sodium is positive. Both forces are screaming in.
So sodium is desperate to get in. It's knocking on the door with a battering ram.
Precisely. It is under immense electrochemical pressure. And if we did nothing, sodium would leak in, potassium would leak out, the gradients would vanish, the battery would die, and the cell would die.
Enter the hero of the story, the Na plus K plus ATPase pump.
The engine of the battery. This pump is a protein that is working constantly, day and night, against the tide.
What does it do?
It grabs 3 sodium ions from inside the cell and physically throws them out. Then it grabs 2 potassium ions from outside and drags them back in.
3 out, 2 in each.
Notice the math. You are losing 3 positive charges and gaining only 2. That means a net loss of 1 positive charge every single cycle. The pump itself is electrogenic. It helps create that negative charge inside the cell.
But this can't be free. Moving things against their desire, against their gradients, that has to take energy.
Far from free. This is the most expensive utility bill in the body. Ganong states that this single pump consumes 24% of the cell's entire energy output.
Wait, a quarter? 24% of everything the cell earns goes just to keeping the sodium out and the potassium in.
In nerve cells, which need to fire constantly and reestablish these gradients, it can be up to 70%. It is a massive tax on life.
Wow.
The resting membrane potential of negative 70 milliV is not a relaxed state. It is a state of high tension, maintained by relentless, expensive work.
That is a profound shift in perspective. Resting isn't passive. Resting is expensive.
Which segues perfectly to our next section. Where does the money come from? We have to talk about metabolism.
ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the universal energy currency.
It's a great metaphor because, like currency, it is meant to be spent. It has these high-energy phosphate bonds. Each one holds about 12,000 calories per mole of energy. The turnover is incredibly rapid. A molecule of ATP exists for only minutes before it is stripped, used, and reformed.
We have three main sources for this cache: carbohydrates, which is mainly glucose, lipids, which are fatty acids, and proteins, which are amino acids. But the machinery for processing them differs greatly. It's like we have an old engine and a new engine.
The old engine is glycolysis.
Anaerobic, no oxygen needed.
Right. It happens out in the cytoplasm. You take one molecule of glucose, break it into 2 molecules of pyruvate. It's very fast, but it is terribly inefficient. You get a net gain of only 2 ATP molecules per glucose.
2 ATP, that's spare change. You can't run the 24% pump tax on that for very long.
It is survival mode. Less than 5% of the cell's total energy comes from this. The new engine, the powerhouse, is the mitochondria.
This is where the magic happens. This is aerobic respiration. The citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle.
In the mitochondria, we use oxygen. We take the products of glycolysis, convert them to acetyl-CoA, and then we strip that down to CO2 and hydrogen atoms. We feed those hydrogens into the final stage, which is oxidative phosphorylation.
Guyton describes this as a chemiosmotic mechanism. It sounds complicated, but it's basically a hydroelectric dam, isn't it?
It is exactly like a dam. The machinery in the intermitochondrial membrane pumps protons, which are just H+ ions, out into the space between the two membranes. This creates a massive gradient, a reservoir of protons, like water behind a dam.
And then it lets them flow back.
It lets them flow back in through a literal physical turbine called ATP synthetase.
It actually spins.
It spins, like a water wheel. And that mechanical spinning action is used to jam a phosphate back onto ADP, regenerating ATP.
And the efficiency.
95% of the cell's ATP comes from this process. From one molecule of glucose, you get about 30 to 32 ATP this way. It is the Ferrari compared to the Model T of glycolysis.
But this engine has rules. Ganong mentions directional flow valves.
Right. Metabolism isn't a free-for-all. Certain enzymes act as one-way streets. For example, once the enzyme hexokinase traps glucose in the cell by phosphorylating it, it can't just leak back out. It's committed to the pathway.
There is a critical clinical link here that Ganong emphasizes regarding what happens when the fuel mix is wrong: ketoacidosis.
This happens in starvation or in uncontrolled type 1 diabetes. In both cases, the body can't get glucose into the cells, so it switches to burning fats almost exclusively.
That sounds good in theory, burning fat. We all want to burn fat.
But the Krebs cycle, the main engine, needs a little bit of carbohydrate derivative, specifically oxaloacetate, to keep spinning smoothly. Without it, the breakdown products of fat, which are called acetyl-CoA, start to pile up. They have nowhere to go.
So they get converted into something else.
They condense into ketone bodies: acetoacetate, beta-hydroxybutyrate, and acetone.
And these are acids.
They are acids. They overwhelm the body's bicarbonate buffering system. The blood pH drops precipitously. The patient develops air hunger, trying to blow off CO2 to compensate. Their breath smells fruity, like acetone from nail polish remover.
Carbohydrate is anti-ketogenic. I remember that phrase.
A key phrase. You need a little sugar to burn the fat cleanly. The saying is, fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate.
We're in the final stretch here. We've powered the cell. Now let's look at the cellular housekeeping and movement, the internal logistics.
The endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, is the factory floor. The rough ER has ribosomes studded on it, makes proteins that will be exported. The smooth ER makes lipids and detoxifies drugs.
And the Golgi apparatus?
The Golgi is the shipping department. It receives products from the ER, modifies them, packages them into vesicles, and ships them out. It also replenishes the cell membrane. Every time a cell performs endocytosis, it eats something, it loses a bit of membrane. The Golgi patches the hole.
Speaking of eating, let's talk about the stomach of the cell, the lysosomes.
They contain powerful digestive enzymes called hydrolases. They digest bacteria that have been eaten or old, worn-out organelles.
But we also have peroxisomes, which are slightly different.
They are like the hazmat team. They contain oxidases, specifically catalase. They detoxify substances like alcohol and break down very long-chain fatty acids, which are otherwise hard to handle.
There's a concept here called autophagy, which literally means self-eating.
It sounds gruesome, but it is absolutely essential for survival. Organelles wear out. A mitochondrion in the liver only lasts about 10 days. When it gets old and inefficient, the cell wraps it up in a membrane and digests it with lysosomes to recycle the raw materials.
So it's cellular recycling.
It's recycling. And during starvation, the cell will start eating its own non-essential parts to provide fuel to stay alive.
Finally, locomotion. Cells aren't just sitting there, some of them move.
Amoeboid movement. This is how white blood cells crawl through tissues to hunt bacteria. It actually uses actin and myosin, the same proteins that are in your muscles. The cell literally builds a foot, a pseudopodium in front of it, and pulls itself forward.
And it knows where to go because of chemotaxis.
Moving toward the smell of a chemical, like the signals released by bacteria or damaged tissue.
And ciliary movement.
That's the whip-like motion of many tiny hairs. You find this in the airways, beating mucus up and out of the lungs, and in the fallopian tubes, moving the ovum toward the uterus. It requires massive amounts of ATP and precise control by calcium.
So we have traveled from the internal sea all the way down to the spinning turbine of the mitochondria and the crawling of a white blood cell. Let's synthesize this. What is the big picture takeaway from this first deep dive?
If you look at the arc from Guyton and Ganong, a few themes just keep coming up. First, regulation over capacity. The body doesn't build infinite capacity for everything. It builds precise regulation high gain for the things that can kill you quickly.
And trade-offs. There are always trade-offs.
Everything has a cost. The stability of your membranes costs 24% of your energy budget. Speed versus precision. Stability versus energy cost.
And the why. It all comes back to the social order.
All of this complex machinery, the pumps, the feedback loops, the burning of ATP, it all exists for one single reason: to maintain the milieu interior, to keep that internal sea perfectly stable so that 40 trillion cells can trust the environment enough to cooperate and form a complex organism.
I love the provocative thought Guyton leaves us with regarding disease. It really reframes the whole concept.
Yes. We often think of symptoms as the disease, but often the symptom is the homeostatic compensation. High blood pressure might be the body's desperate attempt to force filtration through a failing kidney.
So the high blood pressure isn't the primary problem, it's the solution to a different problem.
It's a solution with a terrible side effect. The pressure saves you from kidney failure today, but it destroys your heart and blood vessels tomorrow. Pathology is often the study of the cost of maintaining balance.
That is a heavy thought to end on for everyone listening. Don't just memorize the numbers we threw at you. Try to visualize the gradients. Picture the sodium knocking on the door. Picture the water chasing the salt.
And read the chapters. Ganong chapter 1, Guyton chapter 1 and 2. Look at the diagrams of the membrane and the feedback loops. You cannot understand the machine if you don't look at the blueprints. This was a map. The book is the territory.
We will see you in the next deep dive.
Until then.